keep asking those questions. And the first one for today is, when will the Port Harcourt refinery begin production? By extension, when will Nigerians begin to get petrol from that refinery? So while we wait for the answers to those questions, well, let's turn our attention to matters of governance at the sub-national levels. We'll pay attention to the federal government, absolutely, but we shouldn't do it at the detriment of the others. And I'm talking about the states and local government. So today, we're going to be asking you, do you know who your local government chairman or your local council head, whether it's a transition committee, what have you, do you know who is in charge or what kind of structure is in charge? Well, let's tell you why this is important this morning. We're joined on the program by the Executive Director of YIAGA Africa, Mr. Samson Itodo, who joins us live from the U.S. Good morning and welcome to the Morning Brief.
A very good morning to you.
Well, you put out that research which you've done, particularly about how different states are being governed, or different local governments and states are being governed. Some of them you have the usual local government chairman, and you see right there on the screen how the local governments in Nigeria are currently being run. It's a very interesting breakdown, and you'll be shocked that some people who stay in that area don't even know what obtains in that area. You see that there are 21 with elected chairmen, 8 caretaker committee, 4 state principal officers, 4 transition committees. Mr. Todo, what does this mean, really? Let's begin with the pictorial we're seeing. What does this really mean for governance, particularly at the local government structure?
Well, it simply means that the whole concept of local democracy and public participation in decision-making at the local government level is a mirage within our context. And the whole concept of local government administration or local government system is to bring government closer to the people. But the irony, or the rather unfortunate development for our polity, is that level of government that is the closest to the people is the farthest from the people for a plethora of reasons. One stems from the lack of autonomy for the local governments, the hijack and capture of local government administration by overbearing state governors, the lack of financial autonomy, and also, a situation at the local government level where citizens are not given the opportunity to participate in decision making, and it defeats the entire purpose. Because if you look historically, why local governments were created in the first place, they were created to bring government closer to the people. But sadly, the current structure that we operate, even though it's at variance with the Constitution, makes the local government farthest from the people.
So let me just quickly run through those states yet again. For states with elected chairmen, you have quite a number in Southwest Oyo, Ogun, Lagos. You have some in the Northwest as well, the Northeast as well as the Central. You have Taraba, Nasarawa, and the rest. But it's interesting, caretaker committees, you have them across Sokoto, Zamfara, Kogi, Benue, Oshun. That's the one state in the Southwest with that. And then you have state principal officers. Again, some people who are in Kano, for example, might not know that's the case with them. In Bauchi, as well as Adamawa and Enugu. While transition committees exist in states like Plateau, Central, Kwara, you see Imo and Akwa Ibom, Southeast and South-South. So let's start from the rear. For states, you have transition committees and state principal officers there. You said largely that it's a mirage, but maybe we should drill deeper. So are they missing something? We'll get to the local government chairman or the semblance of it. But those that have that, are they missing anything?
Absolutely. They're missing a lot because first, why do we have, local governments that are not manned by democratically elected leaders? I will come to, the analysis of the states that have elected, because for most of those states, it is actually coronation and not election, because the quality of the elections for local government councils have always been called to question. And I say that for in most states, what you have is not election. What you have is anointing and coronation of, loyalist of a governor who is in power at that particular time. Now, when I spoke earlier, I talked about the capture of the local government system. One of the instruments of control, one of the instruments of power that governors seem to have and leverage is the local government councils. They capture the local government councils and make it difficult, for leaders at the local government level to govern. And all this is just tied to our own notion of democracy. So there are two contending views. First, governors believe that local governments are not the third tier of government, that they are an appendage of the state. Therefore, a governor has the power, to regulate, to govern local governments. And this is one paradigm that shapes how our governors approach local government administration. The second contending view is that local governments are a third tier of government. And therefore, by virtue of the provisions of the Constitution, that they should be manned by democratically elected, leaders, you see governors appointing, loyalists, their cronies, as local government chairmen. So when you have transition committees, it's simply the governors making a bold statement that they want to control how local governments are run. You know what is interesting, Kayode and colleagues, is that the practice is if a governor inherits a democratically elected local government chairman, and he feels, that the local government leaders at that particular state are not loyal to him, what they do is to dissolve, those local government councils and then appoint their cronies and loyalists just to maintain control of the local governments, including maintain control of the finances of the local governments. And despite attempts to liberate local governments, make them financially independent and also administratively independent, the governors have resisted every attempt by the National Assembly to confer autonomy on the local governments, because the cardinal principle of autonomy at the local government level is a cardinal feature of democracy. And we can't have national integration, we can't have development if people at the local government level don't have a say in how local governments are run.
So it would seem that, the aspect of the law that places us in a constitutional conundrum would be Section 162, that provides for states' joint account. But even at that, the 36 state governors in 2022 lost, a case wherein the NFIU tried to stop them from, spending or spending funds on behalf of the local government. Where does that leave us if even the federal government's attempt at granting the local government some financial autonomy is still not being implemented? As far as I know, the 36 state governors have not appealed. I may be wrong, but they've not appealed that judgment. But still, they're receiving funds of the local government and perhaps are not allowing, evidently, local government administration to thrive.
But Bukola, what you just narrated is just an expression of the fact that there is a sharp contrast between idealism and realism. That yes, whilst in the letters of our Constitution and the pronouncements of the court, and also decisions taken by public institutions that have constitutional authority to do so, have established this, you have a situation where the rule of law is not upheld. And there is no consequence because there are certain gaps even in the Constitution that makes it difficult or that the governors also, leverage to express this level of impunity in the management of local government affairs. So it's just the attitude of some governors, to the rule of law. Because how can, the Constitution clearly establishes that local governments shall be governed by democratically elected leaders. But you still have over 413 local governments out of the 774 local governments being governed by, appointed individuals. That's totally unacceptable. And this is why the same Constitution needs to clearly state the functions like it has done, but the powers, but also the term of office of local government chairman. And this is something that YIAGA Africa has been advocating for, that there is need for the Constitution to clearly establish, make express provisions, establishing local governments at the third tier of government. This is not new because in the 8th and the 9th Assembly, attempts were made to establish local government system within our constitution, but it was resisted. That even after the National Assembly passed that amendment, when it went to the states, the state legislatures, some restrained themselves from voting, some even rejected, the autonomy conferred on local governments. And so, yes, there needs to be a national conversation, but to fix this, you've got constitutional reengineering.
So I know that Section 7 is what guarantees the provision that guarantees elected local government chairmen. All of this caretaker and all of this we're seeing, I don't know whether it's an aberration or there's a provision in the law to that, but I know that Section 7 talks about the establishment of a local government area. So let's drill deep further to ask, what are the provisions in the Constitution that the state governors are leveraging on just to literally rape the system?
Now, so first, they are leveraging the whole provision that deals with, the creation of the joint states, the state and local government, the joint states account, which is provided under Section 612. But when the Constitution said they're democratically elected, the Constitution was silent on the term of office, for the local government chairmen and councillors. And so they leverage that gap within the Constitution, to undermine local government administration. And this is why in attempts made by the National Assembly to establish, enforce local government autonomy, it was clearly stated in the proposed bill that the term of office, for local government chairmen should be 4 years. So that as the governor's term also ends, so will the terms of the local government chairman also end. And this is one gap within the law. The issue relating, to the functions of the local government, they are clearly prescribed. But the governors and the weak institutions we have, not able to hold the governors to account, is also something that we must call to question. And in this particular case, is the state houses of assemblies. And in the previous amendment process, there was need to strengthen the independence of the state, assemblies. Why is it that state assemblies cannot call the governors to order when they violate provisions of the Constitution? Are they so incapacitated that they cannot hold the governors to account? Because the state houses of assemblies exist to hold the governors, to account. And if they exploit these gaps within our Constitution, then they need to hold the governors to account. But because they were not independent, due to certain financial restrictions or financial autonomy that was restricted, the National Assembly conferred financial autonomy on the state houses of assemblies. It was signed into law. When it came to implementation, we saw how the governors also stood in the way of implementing that particular provision. I mean, this is what you get when a country does not uphold the rule of law, when you have weak institutions that can't hold executives to account. So there is great need, as we are currently undergoing another constitutional amendment process, that ALGON, which is the Association of Local Government Chairmen, and civil society, the media, and also political stakeholders need to consider the discussion of local government autonomy as one, a developmental conversation. That we cannot have urbanization, we cannot have development at the local government level if this local government are subjected to the whims and caprices of the governors. The second is a national integration discussion, because when you develop at the local government level, you strengthen national unity and national integration, that citizens will feel they are part of the Nigerian state because the closest government to them is functioning, is delivering the promise of democracy. Their social conditions is being improved because they have leaders at the local government level that they elected and are governing to advance their interests. But thirdly, it's also the point about the rule of law. And I think that this entire question about local government administration is centered on rule of law, because the Constitution, yes, it's got its gaps, but can you just implement and enforce the current provisions of the Constitution without, any undue interference by the executive at the state level?
So I'll bring to you a typical case that we're seeing playing out in Rivers State, the back and forth between the governor and the state assemblies. Whether or not that is an ideal of how there should be checks and balance is another question entirely, because what we're seeing there is becoming more of a tussle now, a political tussle, and it's been described as a crisis, full-blown crisis. And what we saw recently, not just this recent veto, there was a previous veto that the Assembly actually essentially amended the local government bill that allows them to extend the tenures of elected local government chairmen by 6 months in the event of the inability of River State's Electoral Commission to conduct local government elections. So when we want to see the checks and balances play out in real life, would you say River State is an example of what we want to see?
Well, I won't say
I know it's a tricky one. Rivers politics is always tricky.
It's a tricky one because I really don't want to delve into the political intrigues in River State, but I'll restrict myself to the provisions of the law and what I consider, is ideal without particular reference to River State. One, we need to ensure that this abuse of state control, needs to be limited, because one, as the executive, and one way, the governors capture the local governments is to stifle them of resources. Because if you don't have resources at a local government level, how do you implement, and perform the functions expressed in the Constitution? And so I think that, governors have a role to play in ensuring that they respect the autonomy that local governments have with respect to their finances, but also uphold provisions of Section 150 of the Electoral Act that already establishes the procedure, for local government elections. Because if we talk about the elections for local governments, it's actually an aberration, not just of the Constitution, but of democratic practices, because none of those elections conducted at the local government level meets the test of electoral integrity, meets the test, of credibility, and also meet the test of transparency, because you can have a situation where in one state, a governor conducts elections, at the states, and then one party sweeps all the entire election. Our results are actually written. So we can talk about local government elections, which is a key area of interest for us at YIAGA Africa. But to your point, I think governors need to respect autonomy of local governments. State houses of assemblies also have a responsibility to keep governors in check. But state houses of assemblies must also do so within the ambits of the law.
There you go. And also to add, which is why we're having this conversation, the people need to wield that power they have. Do you know who your elected local government chairman is? Did you even participate in the election? So for just, as we wind down, let's just take a look again. So if you stay in any of these states, this is what is the reality in your states. This is a wake-up call from all of us, Channels Television, YIAGA Africa, to you out there. Let us all wake up to our responsibility as citizens and also pay attention to the local government. So I hope you've been able to see your states there. Mr. Samson Itodo, we'd like to thank you so much. I know you stayed up for us to have this conversation, so on behalf of Nigerians, we thank you for your work.
No, always a delight. No, thank you.
Successful
thank you very much.
trip there. Mr. Samson Itodo is the Executive Director of YIAGA Africa. Thank you again.
Thank you.
We'll take a moment now. When we return, we have the Minister of State for Health joining us on the show. We'll speak to healthcare in the country. You don't want to miss this. It's still the morning brief, guys.